everyone. This is chapter 10 in sociology. So we just finished chapter 9, which focused on stratification here in the United States, why some people are rich, why some people are poor. This is a continuation of that conversation. However, instead of focusing on person to person or group to group, we're going to focus on country to country. You're going to see that a lot of the same issues arise as it relates to power and systemic issues. We'll talk about those specifically. But just know that instead of talking about upper class, middle class, and lower class, we talk about high income countries, middle income countries, and low income countries. One of the things that we know to be true is the United States is very fortunate in that across the globe, just a little more than 15% of the population lives in a high income country. Uh, a little over 40%, a little over 40% of the population across the globe lives in low-income countries, right? And so you'll see in just a moment the vast differences in terms of opportunity and access to resources, how different those are between the top and the bottom. Across the globe, about 1 in 4 people live in poverty, right? So you can tell we're going to focus a lot on poverty today. But let's start out with high income countries. And so high income countries have a very high standard of living. So we're talking about countries like the United States, Japan, right? These are countries that a good percentage of the population has access to all kinds of resources. I mean, just think about the access to food that we have, right? I mean, when you're on campus, there's vending machines everywhere. You likely have a pantry, a refrigerator, a freezer at home. You can stand, if you're like my college-age children, you can stand in front of the refrigerator for 5 minutes with the door open, and you can tell me that there's nothing to eat, even though I see a refrigerator full of food, right? But we have an awful lot of resources in this country, and so this is a high-income country. You have a slide, a bar graph slide showing the per capita income differences between high-income countries, middle-income countries, and low-income countries. We can see now this is a little dated. However, the average person, this includes infants and babies in high-income countries have a little bit over $36,000 per person. And we see that in low-income countries, boy, that number is around $1,200, right, per year. So those are two very, very different lives. Look, middle-income countries, it's around 4,000, right? So stark difference between high income and middle income, and then another stark difference between middle income and low income. So middle income countries, South Korea would be a good example of this. And look, South Korea's made an awful lot of strides in the last couple of decades. Just look at the automobile industry and the cars that have come to the US from South Korea. It reminds me a great deal of the 70s when Japan started to make inroads in the market here in the United States in terms of automobiles. In the 70s is really when the price of gas really rocketed up, right? Before OPEC was formed, the United States would negotiate with OPEC nations and get each of the nations to undercut a bid from someone else, and so gas was extremely cheap. OPEC got smart, they worked together, they price fixed, right? And they said, hey, this is the price. No one sell it for anything less than this so that we can all make money. And that dramatically raised the price of petroleum here in the US. It caused high inflation because petroleum is used to make plastic goods. Back then we had rubber bumpers on our cars. It was there. Obviously gasoline, so the price of a lot of things just skyrocketed up. So for the first time, we started talking in the 70s about MPG, miles per gallon. And most cars in the US at that time were 8-cylinder, just gas guzzlers. When you press the gas, you could actually see the gas gauge go down, and you didn't care because gas was cheap. But then when gas was expensive, Japan was selling, right? Toyota, Honda, and back then Datsun were selling smaller cars, cheaper cars that were very good on gas, right? So that was how they came into the market. And then as time went on, they started making nicer cars. Look, Honda, they went from making the tiny little Civic, and they advanced that into an Accord, which is a little bigger, a little nicer car. Now Honda makes Acura, which is a high-end car, right? So Toyota's done the same thing, and we're starting to see that. We're starting to see that with some of the cars, Hyundai, Kia coming in, right? And so not all Hyundais now are extremely cheap cars. They're getting buyer and brand loyalty, and so anyway, so we're seeing some of the same things in terms of the automobile market through South Korea as we saw several years ago, several decades ago, from Japan. Another country I like to bring up is also India, right? Your textbook doesn't put it there, but India is coming into a middle income country, and there's an awful lot of jobs from the U.S. that have gone to India. Some industry has gone to India. Look, an awful lot of people in India speak the Queen's English, and so telemarketing jobs, customer service, telephonic customer service jobs have gone to India, and so that's been an awful lot of growth for that country. One of the issues India is having right now is many of their top students are choosing to come to the US to go to school. And then the concern in India is a lot of those students are choosing not to return home. They're actually staying here in the United States because of money, right? Because of access and resources. And so, so there's a concern in some upper echelons of India about how to keep their best and brightest at home. So anyway, those are good problems to have as a country is beginning to advance. Low income countries. We're almost always talking about low income countries being agrarian, being farming, living off the land, right? Those sorts of countries. These are countries most prone, as we talked about in chapter 9. These are the countries most prone to malnutrition, devastation from weather events, whether it's hurricanes or drought or floods. So they just don't have the infrastructure through farming to deal with an awful lot of those issues. They're just so reliant on the ecosystem and on weather. So that's bad things happen. Bad things can really happen when that's what you're reliant on. Another thing that we see, and this is probably intuitive for you. I just want to say it anyway. When it comes to births, so how many children couples have or women have. We see in high income countries a lower number of births. We also see in middle income countries a little higher than high income, and in low income countries we see a significantly higher number of births. And look, part of the reason for this, just think of education. In low income countries, think Brazil. In low income countries, there's just, you're not going to school very long, right? And so it's an awful lot easier to start having children when you're 14, 15 years old. It's just real simple math. If you go in the US, if you go straight through college, you're 22 years old when you graduate, right? And so if you get married at 25, start a family at 26, 27, just do the math. You're going to have significantly fewer births than someone who started 10 plus years earlier, right? So education in an industrialized society has a lot to do with births going down, right? It's just people have goals, and so they put off having families and having children until they're more established in their career. So we can that explains a good deal of the differences in births between high income and low income. This always bothers me when I click onto the screen. Nearly 900 million people on our planet today will go without food, not because they're trying to lose weight, right? Not because they're just intermittently fasting, right? That's one of the new things people are doing now. They're going with nearly 900 million people are going without food today simply because there isn't food for them to eat. Almost all these people are in low-income countries, and again, we're talking about devastation from floods and droughts and forest fires and right, just all of those kinds of things. And so I think many times it's difficult for us here in the United States to really understand what this number means because we have access to food all the time, right? Just absolutely all the time. And so so it's difficult for us to get it. But when there isn't food, that kind of changes our priorities in life, right? Food suddenly becomes the number one. You guys understand this, right? I love it when this is a weird analogy, but just stay with me. I love it when a rich person says to me, well, money doesn't mean anything to me. Well, right, because you have it, right? When you have something, it means less to you. When you don't have something that you need, it's suddenly very important to you. So to poor people, money's very important, right? If you're trying to figure out how to pay the rent every month, how to make your car payment every month, how to pay your Sprint bill every month, right? These are so suddenly money is extremely important to you. And so it's the same thing with food. Here in the United States, we oftentimes take food for granted because it's just present. It's just there. When there isn't food, it's suddenly the most important thing in the world. So, okay. Education and literacy, I'll just say this really quickly. I think everyone intuitively understands this. Middle and high income countries place a larger uh, value on education simply because it gets you where you want to go. It helps you get a job, it helps you establish a career. One of the issues that we have within low income countries is getting people to understand the need for education. Freire, I mentioned Brazil a few minutes ago for this reason. Freire several years ago wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which pedagogy is child education, and he was talking about child education of people in oppressed areas, particularly agrarian areas of Brazil. And so his book is about describing this population, but also talking about how to get people in situations that you wouldn't necessarily think that literacy would be helpful. And his point is, well, let's show people how it's helpful. It's a tremendous book, and it's very helpful. And because of that, Freire is not allowed back in Brazil. But anyway, but education and literacy. Literacy is important across the globe, and it's just more important that people in low-income countries start to see how it can benefit thoughts and ideas. And just think about how when you read a book, sometimes it spurs a new idea, a new way of thinking of something, and gets our brains activated. So literacy is a very important thing. And I'm gonna skip over that. Let's get to there are a couple really interesting maps, color-coded maps showing high income, middle income, and low income countries. I don't ask a test question, so if you just breeze over that, then I get it. But do yourself a favor, take a couple of minutes and just look at that map and think of countries that you know, think of countries that are on the news. Think about why some countries that are in the news, the Middle East is a great thing. Take a look at Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, and who's a high income country, who's a low income country, and and why people are fighting for different things, and just educate yourself a little bit with that. Also, take a look at Central America, where many of us like to vacation, in Jamaica and some other places, and how when you're at the resorts, Aruba, not Central America, but Aruba is actually a great example of this. If you go to Jamaica or Aruba, they'll say something like, you'll stay at a really nice resort, and they'll say, don't leave the resort. And the reason is it's a low income country, and if you leave the resort, you might be in some danger. And so when you're at the resort, you just think, oh my gosh, this is a beautiful country, this is unbelievable, but you're not seeing the real country, right? You're only seeing the actual resort. So we kind of confuse ourselves sometimes about what countries are actually like. There are six theories and we're only going to talk about three. There's 6 theories of global inequality, and I want you to be familiar with 3 of them. Let's actually start with the first one, which is market-oriented theory. I want you to know this theory. Here's what market-oriented theory says. Market-oriented theory says that your economy, that you don't have rules, right? You keep the government out of the economy, and the economy just fixes itself. So if someone is making a dangerous product, word will get out and people will stop purchasing that product and the company will go out of business. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the idea behind market-oriented theory, right? That the market will take care of itself. So in this kind of economy, you want the government completely on the outside. The opposite of that is a state-centered theory. And so a state-centered theory says that you want the government in the middle of the economy for equality reasons, right? You want to make sure that people have access to the same kinds of resources. You want to make sure that the economy is benefiting everyone. The problem with a state-centered economy is that governments are slow, governments are bureaucracies, and they just are unable to anticipate changes. They're unable to move quickly, and so it's really difficult for them to compete on the world stage. We've seen this with a number of countries, Venezuela probably being one of them. There's still all kinds of oil in the ground in Venezuela, and they're just not able to get this part going. So the two opposite ends of the spectrum is we have market-oriented theory where we want the government out of the way, and state-centered theory where we want the government right in the middle. Neither really works, right? I mean, neither's the best way to go. Let me say this. We want government regulation as it relates to food, because if we didn't, we'd be eating food all the time that could potentially kill us, right? We want the FDA, we want the Food and Drug Administration testing things and finding salmonella and making sure the processes are being followed. Look, Chicago's a great example. 100 years ago, Chicago was known for steel mills and meatpacking plants. And when unions started to come into meatpacking plants, it was for one reason, and that was safety. I mean, people were dying every single workday. I'm not exaggerating. Someone was dying every single workday on average in the meatpacking plants because there were no safety procedures. And so it was a job, so people were willing to do it. However, they were absolutely putting their lives at risk when they did that. So we want OSHA, right? We want rules in the workplace to protect us. And so protection is really why you want the government involved. How much? We'll let the politicians deal with that particular question, and they all disagree. But that's the issue with market-oriented theory. And again, the issue with state-centered theory is it's just not nimble enough. So the other theory I want to talk about is dependency theory. So this is kind of the blaming the victim that we had in chapter 9. This is kind of down that systemic path, if you will. And here's what I mean by that. High income countries really determine the path of many low income countries. For those of you, you've probably heard of Michael Jordan because you're in the Chicagoland area, and this may surprise you that years and years ago in the 90s, the Bulls were the best team in the NBA. They won 6 NBA titles. Michael Jordan was the best basketball player on the planet, and it was a fun time to be in the Chicago area. Toward the end of his career, and look, people still buy Air Jordans. My son wears Air Jordans, right? So it was a huge deal for people across the country to wear Jordan attire, whether it was shoes or jerseys or whatever it was. And toward the end of his career, Nike made all the Jordan shoes and everything. And toward the end of his career, people started to look into the countries, the companies in the countries, in the low-income countries that were making those shoes. And what they found is in low-income countries, they found children working in sweatshops making those shoes. And so Michael Jordan started to take some heat from that, which is a little interesting because his name's on the shoe. Should he be flying around the globe making sure that every, company that's making them is doing it the right way? I personally don't think so. Maybe because I'm a Michael Jordan fan. But Nike and Jordan started to take some heat from that. And so, since it's a Chicago story, I want to use that to be helpful with dependency theories. And so here's kind of how it worked. Nike would go to a low-income country, and they would go to a place in the middle of nowhere or a small village, and they would say to the people, "We want to build a factory here to make Air Jordan shoes." And they would say, look, here's why you should do this. People are going to get paid money. There will be other businesses that come in. I mean, look, when businesses come into an area, then you're going to have other things. You're going to have dry cleaners that come in because workers need their clothes taken care of. Restaurants are going to come in because people need places to eat now. Hotels are going to come in because business travelers are going to be coming to that area to stay for business meetings. So you start getting Office Depot and Office Max and all these other businesses start to come in. So it's a huge deal for that small village to have Nike come in and build a plant. But here's what happens. First of all, the people working there are paid pennies compared to what people in the United States are making, which is why Nike does it, because they save money on labor. But here's what they do. After a few years, wages start to go up a little bit. And Nike says to the town, they say, look, we're very happy with our relationship with you, but here's the problem. Wages are going up too high. And if people don't take a pay cut, we're going to pull up stakes and we're going to move our company someplace else. So if you're the townspeople, what do? You do whatever Nike says, right? Because you kind of have the golden goose, as it were, and you don't want to let it go. I'll give you a local example. Harvard, Illinois. You guys been to Harvard? They have milk days in the spring. I forget, but anyway, Harvard's the town with a cow statue in the middle of the town, and they had that before it was cool to have cow and horse statues. And anyway, so Harvard, years and years ago, probably 20 years ago, cut a deal with Motorola. Harvard built a large campus for Motorola. They were going to build phones there. This is when Motorola dominated with Razr and others. They dominated the phone market. That's no longer true. And they built this huge facility with all kinds of tax cuts and breaks for Motorola. And Harvard took this chance because they thought, well, down the road, we're going to have all these new businesses, all these new taxes are going to come in. And at some point, Motorola is going to start paying us all kinds of taxes as well. So this is a great benefit for Motorola. Literally a few months in, Motorola contacted Harvard and said, we're not selling phones the way we used to. We're pulling out of the agreement. And they have attorneys, they have smart attorneys, and they did everything the right way, and they just pulled out. I remember watching the news one night. The mayor of Harvard was on the news, and someone asked him, "So now what?" And he said, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to call Motorola and ask them to give us money?" I mean, everything was in contracts, and so that facility is still in Harvard, and probably 98% of it is unused. And unfortunately for Harvard, they continue to have to pay for electricity and water and everything else to that facility. It's a bad situation in Harvard. So what happened in Harvard, we see in other parts of the globe, and this is really dependency theory. And so the concern is that high income countries, and in particular high income industries, go into poor parts of the world and just simply exploit them. And when they're done exploiting them, they toss them to the side and they go someplace else. So again, I want you to know the three theories. I want you to know market-oriented theory, government's completely out of the way. I want you to know state-centered theory, government's right in the middle of the theory. And I want you to know dependency theory, which is really talking about, this is really conflict theory, right? Remember, our word for conflict theory is exploitation. And it's when the people on top are exploiting the people on the bottom. Well, that's exactly what dependency theory talks about: high income countries and industries exploiting low income countries. Okay. That's going to be our conversation for today. So I hope everyone has a tremendous day. Keep focusing on sociology, and I will see you soon.